It began with a silence. Not the silence of a sleeping city, but the kind that settles when something deep inside a state begins to crumble quietly, without alarms, without warning. Somewhere inside Israel's most secretive organization, a signal went dark. Files vanished. Codes no longer matched. And for the first time, Mossad, the agency that prided itself on knowing everything, had lost track of one of its own. I am the digital sleuth. And in this episode, we are opening a classified story Mossad never wanted the world to hear. The one that shows how its greatest power became its greatest weakness. This is not just a tale of espionage. It is a chilling cybercrime documentary of how trust shattered, systems failed, and a powerful institution was brought to its knees by an invisible enemy within. For decades, Mossad was built on an image of ruthless precision, silence, and invisibility. Its name alone carried an aura of invincibility across the Middle East. Its successes, whether assassinations, infiltrations, or covert operations, were whispered with a mix of fear and fascination. But behind that reputation was something else, something far more fragile. It was a system held together by secrecy and trust, both of which can shatter from within. This story does not begin with an enemy or a battlefield. It begins with the quiet arrogance that grows when power goes unquestioned. Mossad had become too confident, too insulated, and too used to operating beyond oversight. It was shielded not only from the public, but even from the political bodies meant to supervise it. Over time, its walls grew high, but its foundations grew hollow. Intelligence agencies live and die by one thing: the control of information. Yet in Mossad's case, the obsession with secrecy became its own blind spot. Within its secure facilities, information was fragmented across compartments. Agents knew only fragments of the truth, and analysts saw only what their section allowed. It was a structure designed to prevent leaks. But in reality, it created the perfect conditions for one. By the early 2000s, global intelligence networks were shifting. The old world of handwritten reports and coded radio bursts had been replaced by digital archives, vast databases of operations, surveillance, and agent identities. Mossad, like every major intelligence service, moved fast to modernize. But modernization brought exposure. A single individual with access to classified data could, with the right intent and the right tools, compromise everything. And that is exactly what happened. Somewhere deep in the network, an operative, highly trusted and highly trained, began siphoning information. The breach did not come from an enemy infiltration or a physical break-in. It came from within the very system Mossad had sworn could never fail. The agency's internal audits would later reveal how the signals first appeared: unusual access logs, discrepancies in data transfer records, and communications that seemed slightly off. At first, these were dismissed as routine system errors. But they were not. They were the earliest signs of a betrayal that would shake Israel's intelligence establishment to its core. Mossad had long believed its internal culture of loyalty and ideological alignment would protect it from inside threats. Recruitment was based not only on skill, but also on belief. It was a belief in the mission, and in the narrative of a small nation surrounded by enemies. But what happens when that belief cracks? The answer lies in the human side of intelligence. The agents who, behind the secrecy, are still flesh and blood. History shows that betrayals in espionage rarely come from strangers. They come from people who once believed, and then stopped believing. Disillusionment, moral conflict, and personal grievance. These are the real tools of espionage. Independent regional analysts have pointed out that Mossad's greatest structural weakness was psychological, not technical. Its reliance on secrecy fostered a culture where questioning authority was seen as betrayal and silence was survival. When individuals within the system began to see contradictions between the public ideals and the covert realities, cracks formed in their loyalty. Those cracks, once opened, became leaks. This leak, which would later be called Israel's greatest intelligence failure, exposed more than files and codes. It exposed the illusion of control. The betrayal began with a man who knew too much and trusted too little. He was one of Mossad's own, a skilled operator respected for his precision and reliability. For years, he had moved in silence through Europe and the Middle East, collecting fragments of information that shaped Israel's most critical covert strategies. To his superiors, he was a loyal asset. To the agency's internal record, he was beyond suspicion. But under that reputation, something was changing. The betrayal did not happen overnight. It was the slow corrosion of conviction, the kind that grows when belief turns into disillusionment. Within Mossad, dissent was rare, almost forbidden. Questioning the mission meant questioning the state itself. Yet, as this operative watched the agency's methods grow darker, he began to see the system differently. Assassinations were justified under national security, and civilian casualties were dismissed as collateral necessity. He watched surveillance operations targeting even allies. He had joined believing Mossad protected Israel. He stayed long enough to realize it was protecting itself. The turning point came during a mission that went wrong. Deeply wrong. In a European capital, a covert assassination went off script. A civilian was mistakenly killed, and the target escaped. The agency quickly buried the incident, falsifying the report and blaming it on an informant who had no chance to defend himself. For the operative, that cover-up was the last straw. In that moment, his silence ended. The process of betrayal began with a single decision. Not out of greed, but out of anger, the operative began documenting what he saw as systematic lies, internal corruption, political manipulation, and operations that violated international laws. What started as notes in a coded journal evolved into a full archive, a record of Mossad's hidden failures. At first, his goal was not to sell. It was to expose. He reached out through back channels, indirectly, to intermediaries in Eastern intelligence and media. But exposure in this world comes at a cost. And soon, foreign intelligence networks took notice. Iran, Russia, and several Arab security agencies were all aware that someone inside Mossad was leaking. For them, this was not just information. It was a strategic weapon. The operative, caught between moral conviction and fear, began playing a dangerous game. He did not fully trust anyone, not Mossad, and not the outsiders. But he needed to survive. Survival in espionage means trade. He began releasing fragments of data, testing responses. The leaks were small at first. He shared lists of non-official covers, details about Mossad's surveillance techniques, and safe house locations that had already been compromised. Each piece of data was like bait, designed to measure who was listening. When Mossad noticed the leaks, it did not realize they came from within. The agency assumed it was a cyber intrusion, likely by a rival intelligence service. Internal cyber units began sweeping through servers, tracing digital fingerprints across Europe, the Gulf, and Asia. They found anomalies, but all were external. None pointed inward. That was the genius of the betrayal. The traitor understood Mossad's detection systems better than anyone. He knew which logs were checked, which were not, and how to manipulate timestamps. Think of it like a sophisticated phishing attack. But instead of targeting an individual's credentials, he was targeting the blind spots of an entire national security apparatus. He essentially created digital dark patterns within their own logs, making his actions appear benign or external. By the time the agency considered an internal leak, the damage had already crossed borders. Regional security experts have described this moment as the modern silent explosion, a phrase that captures how the entire Israeli intelligence network suddenly fractured without warning. Dozens of Mossad's external operations were compromised. Within weeks, a series of safe houses in Turkey, Cyprus, and Jordan were abruptly abandoned. Communication networks were reset. Foreign collaborators went missing. Inside Mossad headquarters, fear began turning into chaos. The director ordered a total lockdown. All agents were recalled and external operations were frozen. Every workstation was audited, and every operative was interrogated. But the system itself was too big, too old, and too fragmented. A handful of internal investigators suspected the leak was coming from a senior operations unit. This unit handled European surveillance and infiltration missions. They began tracing metadata, narrowing down access logs, and eventually, they found a pattern. Someone was accessing files outside their operational scope, often during hours when the building was supposedly empty. The suspect list narrowed, but by the time they reached the operative, he was gone. Disappearing from Mossad's radar is not easy. Agents live under multiple identities, but the agency always has a way to find them. Yet this one had prepared for years. He had built his exit carefully, with fake trails, misdirection, cash reserves, and a contingency network of foreign contacts. By the time Mossad traced him to Eastern Europe, he was already across the border, protected by people who wanted exactly what he carried. The inner architecture of Israel's most secret intelligence organization, the leak that followed was unlike anything Mossad had faced. It was not a single document or disk. It was a digital cache, structured, labeled, and timed to release progressively. It contained details of covert missions across 2 decades, agent identities, logistical maps, and surveillance footage. The information did not just compromise operations. It revealed Mossad's entire blueprint. Among the files were details of cyber programs aimed at regional infrastructure, covert funding channels tied to political lobbies, and surveillance operations conducted under the guise of diplomatic missions. The revelations hit intelligence circles across the Middle East like a shockwave. For countries long targeted by Mossad, this was vindication. Proof of what they had always accused Israel of doing. But for Israel, it was devastation. The agency that prided itself on infiltration had been infiltrated by its own. Internally, Mossad launched a campaign of disinformation, quietly leaking false leads, suggesting the betrayal came from foreign cyber hackers or a rogue contractor. But behind closed doors, the truth was clearer. The breach was human, not digital. It came from a trusted officer who saw too much, who lost faith in what he served, and who decided the truth mattered more than loyalty. The Israeli leadership moved swiftly to suppress public discussion. Official denials were issued, and any trace of the incident was classified under national emergency. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence services, particularly in Europe and the US, quietly reduced cooperation with Mossad. For them, trust had been broken. If Israel's internal controls could be breached from within, their own information was no longer safe. This echoes countless stories in cybercrime documentary history where a single vulnerability leads to widespread system failure. We see this often, whether it is financial fraud cases stemming from simple human error or massive data breaches from employees falling for sophisticated phishing attacks. The walls of Mossad's headquarters in Tel Aviv had never felt so quiet. For an organization built on motion, constant movement, and constant watchfulness, silence was its worst enemy. Every conversation, every computer log, and every file now carried the weight of suspicion. After the betrayal that tore open its network, Mossad was no longer an intelligence service at war with its enemies. It was an intelligence service at war with itself. The moral of this chilling cybercrime documentary is clear. Even the most fortified systems are only as strong as their weakest link, and more often than not, that link is human. So, what can we learn from Mossad's silent collapse to protect ourselves and our organizations from similar digital threats? First, we must consider the human element. Comprehensive cybersecurity protocols extend beyond firewalls and encryption. They involve rigorous psychological screening and continuous ethical training. This is especially true for employees with access to sensitive information. Disillusionment, financial stress, or even a sense of injustice can be exploited, turning a trusted insider into a threat. Regular, anonymous feedback channels can help identify internal issues before they fester into betrayal. Second, we need a robust cybersecurity architecture. While Mossad had compartmentalization, it clearly had blind spots. This highlights the need for advanced threat detection systems. We should not just look for external intrusions, but also monitor for unusual internal activities. Behavior analytics, AI-driven anomaly detection, and zero-trust architectures are crucial. In a zero-trust model, every access request is verified, regardless of where it comes from. Think about major phishing attacks that leverage trusted internal emails. If every email, even internal, is treated with skepticism until verified, the attack surface shrinks significantly. Third, we must address the dark web threat. The operative used dark web channels to trade information. This emphasizes the importance of dark web monitoring services for any organization. Knowing if your proprietary data, or even employee credentials, are being offered for sale on these illicit markets is vital for a proactive defense. This is where many large-scale financial fraud schemes originate, with stolen data becoming the primary currency of crime. Fourth, we look at incident response and recovery. Mossad's initial response was chaotic. A clear, well-rehearsed incident response plan is paramount. This includes not just technical steps to contain a breach, but also communication strategies for dealing with allies, the public, and internal stakeholders. A smooth recovery minimizes reputational and operational damage. Finally, there is the need for continuous auditing and oversight. No system is infallible. Regular, independent audits of both technical security and internal processes are essential. These audits should not just be about compliance. They should actively seek out vulnerabilities and challenge existing assumptions about security. This is how we prevent the quiet arrogance that afflicted Mossad from leading to our own digital downfall. The operative who leaked the secrets has never been found. His fate remains one of the great internet mysteries of our time. A shadow in the annals of espionage. Mossad officially denies he ever existed, but the consequences of his actions remain visible. In the agency's tightened structure, and in the fear within its own ranks, the enduring suspicion remains that another betrayal could happen again. For intelligence agencies across the world, the lesson was simple. Even the most secret walls can crack from the inside, and when they do, the collapse is not loud. It is silent, slow, and irreversible. This was the day Mossad's myth cracked from the inside. But in the shadows of that collapse, a new breed of intelligence warfare was born. Colder, smarter, and even less forgiving. It reshaped global espionage from Tehran to Langley, forcing every intelligence service to rewrite its playbook in the age of leaks. I am the digital sleuth. And remember, in the digital world, secrets are never buried, only delayed. Stay vigilant. Stay secure. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the Digital Sleuth for more deep dives into the shadows of the internet. Hit that notification bell so you do not miss our next investigation. Until next time.